We also have dperry. He's an Israeli affairs analyst, and he's joining us now from Tel Aviv. Right, let's start off with you, Sultan. What do you make of this?
We need to make sure that Trump is the firewall between the agreement and Netanyahu, because Netanyahu will take every possible opportunity to derail it, because as far as he's concerned, in his extremist government, he has basically not won the war as he promised. He had to negotiate it with a so-called terrorist group, and he had to sit with them in the same room. This is very far from victory as he understands it.
Dan, to you, do you agree with what Sultan was saying there?
No, I really don't. I am, however, surprised that Hamas agreed to give up their most valuable cards, which are the hostages, without a formal agreement on all 20 points, which would include an end to the war, when Sultan is right, that is what they want, an end to the war. But Israel will not agree to an end to the war without Hamas agreeing to what is, from Israel's perspective, the main thing, which is Hamas disarmament. I think if indeed this all goes through, then probably this means that Qatar and other Arab nations have pressed Hamas to disarm, at least in Gaza. Not elsewhere, but at least in Gaza. Without this, I just don't see how Trump can promise Israel won't resume the war, because he himself is committed to that point, which is Hamas disarming. So everything rises and falls on this issue, which I do agree has not yet been publicly resolved. Now, will this mean that Israel hadn't won the war? I'm not so sure. Israel's whole goal was the removal of Hamas from Gaza. That would be achieved with the 20-point plan, and the disarming of Hamas as a potential threat in Gaza. That will have been achieved, and the return of the hostages. That too will have been achieved. Now, as for Netanyahu, I have been a partner to those who are skeptical about him and who suspected that he was prolonging the war because he didn't want his coalition to fall apart. Fair enough. But that calculus flips on its head at this point, because elections must be held within a year. They probably will end up being held because of domestic issues that are for another day. Earlier, they probably will be held in mid or even early 2026. And the Israeli public is fed up with the war. So whereas maybe a year and a half ago, he needed to please Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and maintain a coalition together, assuming the world needs Netanyahu to be prime minister. But now, what he needs is something to take to the voters. So
exactly, Dan.
Peace, not war.
This is what I want to get to here. His political calculus has changed, because he's got to call an election, I think, by the summer of next year. And so there are a lot of things on his plate, not least an economy, which is really showing signs of immense fragility.
I wouldn't say fragility. The Israeli economy actually has not really contracted as much as you would think, given how devastating a war this has been, where reservists by the tens of thousands have had to serve 300 days of reserve a year. It's actually rather remarkable that the economy is not growing but stable, and that the stock market is doing well. But Israel undoubtedly is facing headwinds, something close to an informal boycott with investments, which is a big deal in Israel, because its tech sector is world beating, and it can't be, facing boycotts from investors. With academia, various trade deals that have fallen through, Israel does need the war to end. The economy is not reeling, but undoubtedly, if the war had not ended by the time elections come around, Netanyahu would have faced difficulty. Now, if he can say, when the elections do come around, look, I brought back 2/3 of the hostages alive, the economy more or less limped along and survived, we thrashed Hezbollah, we schooled Iran, the global Iranian militia chaos project, which is undermining our Arab friends, has been set back, and normalcy will prevail around the region, and who knows? Maybe they will be able to expand the Abraham Accords. You see Jared Kushner now involved. I mean, that aligns with that notion, that ambition. It's complex. I am not so sure the Saudis will agree to normalize with Israel without a Palestinian state, which cannot happen as long as Netanyahu is around. The best case scenario that whoever wants a positive outcome can hope for is for Netanyahu to be replaced in the next election, for Likud, without Netanyahu, to be a junior partner in a government led by the current opposition, which will be open to reasonable moves forward, enabling Palestinian sovereignty in part of the territories at least, certainly without an army, but with every other trapping of sovereignty. I think the region could face good times ahead.
Yeah, Anita, you're
Certainly without an army, certainly without the land, certainly without dismantling settlements, certainly. So all of these Israeli no's we've heard before. And when the Oslo Accords were reached and the Palestinians and Israelis agreed on a phased agreement, first one was Gaza, Jericho, and then some self-governance that would lead the Palestinians to their fully independent sovereign state in 5 years. But then there were so many governments, Israeli governments, not all of them were led by Netanyahu, who said, oops, Palestinians need to do this before they can get a state. Palestinians need to do that before they get a state.
Well, there are a lot of preconditions with this as well, are there not?
But there is a very important difference, I think, now. Israel is at the bottom of its legitimacy worldwide.
Yeah, I think the cynicism is a little bit too much. Previous Israeli governments have offered the Palestinians 95% of the land of the West Bank and Gaza with swaps that made it 100%. The Palestinians did not accept that, and I believe that was a mistake. Now, beyond that, I think some version of that proposal will arise once more. I heard objections to my analysis that it will have to be a demilitarized state. That doesn't mean you're not sovereign. Plenty of countries in the world do not have an army, and I think that's a condition that will not be removable. But the land, I think the Palestinians will get under a future moderate Israeli government. As for the settlers, Israel will absolutely have to remove about 80 to 100,000 settlers that are not right on the border. And that's an internal thing for them to work out. I suppose there may be an option where the settlers remain in Palestine, but the Palestinians eventually, in a future Hamas-less landscape, if Netanyahu is removed from office, probably will again be facing an optimal arrangement in a fairly small territory that is the entirety of the Holy Land. And I hope, because I'm a person who would like to see peace, that this time an agreement is reached.
Okay, Sultan, your response.
Well, there is no Hamas-less sort of landscape in Palestine. It's unlikely to happen.
There was the Palestinian Authority before and after and during Hamas, and it was never good enough for the Palestinians to govern themselves. So the fact that we're blaming it on Hamas, that does not give any real excuse of why Palestinians do not have a state. You heard there, the Palestinians rejected deals when the Palestinians are just trying to maintain and stay on their lands while the settlers are taking them away day in and day out.
I promise Dan to have the last word here. Just Dan.
So when I see a future without Hamas, I mean a future without Hamas as a militia undermining the sovereignty of the Palestinian Authority and futurely of the Palestinian state, same as Hezbollah undermining Lebanon. This idea in the region, which sadly has been acquiesced to by most of the Arab countries, I think in a way that was weak, that these militias are okay and that Hamas is okay, is a losing proposition that has undermined the Palestinian national cause for decades now. And if it turns out that at the end of this devastating war, at the very least, these militias operating outside the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority are finally mercifully gone and they free the Palestinian people of their curse, I think that will help Israel take the risks that it must take in order to bring about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Yes, demilitarized. That's the way it's going to have to be.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Dan Perry joining us for the time being. We'll be hearing more from him, no doubt.